Hi guys, welcome back to Binge Watch Britney. So I'm super excited to be doing this next episode. I started getting into a show called Nashville. I had heard about it, but I had never actually seen it. And the reason why I wanted to watch it is because I know that it has the mom from the TV show Friday Night Lights in it. And then Connie Britton, if I'm saying her name correctly. And then we have Hayden, who was a little girl from Remember the Titans. And so I haven't seen Hayden in anything kind of like as a teenager or as an adult. So this is my first time seeing her in something like this since Remember the Titans. The reason why I was willing to give the show a chance is because one, I signed up for Hulu for the Black Friday special, but then also two, because I did really enjoy Empire, which was also a show about music, but it was more about like R&B, hip hop, rap, that type of music, whereas Nashville is completely about country music. It's a completely different genre, and I am not necessarily someone who listens to country music. That was really interesting for me to be willing to kind of like take this show on because I do say my sister says this as well, but we do not like musicals. And so when I think of musicals, I'm thinking of shows that are like, or even movies like the Disney movies and how they go on, they break out into song, and the songs are really long and they're really like emotional and like all of this other stuff. And obviously there's sad songs, happy songs, and I just don't like the idea of songs in movies and TV shows in that way. But I did really like Empire, and I really do love the songs I'm hearing in Nashville. So I'm really glad that I gave this show a shot, just because country music is interesting, even though the genre is completely different. It's something that anybody can relate to. It doesn't really matter what type of music you listen to. This is something that anyone can relate to. If this was a show about like rock music, I could see that maybe being a little bit off-putting, but I did watch Motley Crue, like the TV show, the movie that they did that I think had Machine Gun Kelly in it, if I'm not mistaken. That was interesting to watch. But again, I'm really excited about Nashville. Happy to talk to you guys about Nashville in this episode. One thing I want to point out about country music is that I did hear a lot of really good songs, and it was mainly based on the beat. It was just something that kind of like clicked with me and made me enjoy the song even more. And so I did have a few songs that I ended up downloading on iTunes. And so yeah, I'm building a country music playlist, and I'm really excited about this show. So let's go ahead and get into season one. So the main character obviously is Raina Jane. She is a huge successful country music star. She's been in the game for about 20 years, and she's kind of at that point where they're trying to figure out what's next for her career. She's obviously still on top of the chart. She's still a legend, but they're really just trying to figure out how to keep her relevant, since her fan base is kind of not necessarily changing, but you always want to try to get new generations or whatever to kind of like listen to your music. And so they're just really trying to figure out what's next for her. She is going head to head for the most part with Juliet Barnes, who is kind of like the poppy country music star. And she just really doesn't have any respect for Raina. And so all season long they are butting heads. But getting back to Raina Jane, she had a lot going on in her storyline. He comes from a really successful and rich family. Her dad is Lamar Wyatt. He's super successful. He is kind of in politics, but he's also kind of like behind the scenes, kind of like orchestrating everything that's happening. He's the money guy. He's kind of giving people ideas of what he wants done and when he wants it done. And so Raina kind of has kind of stepped away from this kind of family dynamic. She wants to make it on her own. She doesn't really want to be associated with her father. And we find out obviously that they have fallen out because she reminds her dad so much of her mother, who was also a musician. And then we find out obviously that her mother left the family. The father is unhappy about this, and he is just having a hard time connecting with Raina because of everything that happened with her mother. Something important to know about Raina James is that she is married to a guy named Teddy Conrad. They have two children, and right now Teddy is in financial difficulty just because he had some huge deal that fell through, and he ended up stealing money, embezzling money, $2 million worth of money from a credit union, and then he paid it back. But that's something that he can still be charged with, and so he's really trying to find his footing again in terms of what he's bringing to the table in this relationship. And so he ends up running for mayor, and he is backed by Lamar Wyatt, and obviously this is something that Raina is not happy about because she knows how her father operates. She knows that this is not going to pan out well for Teddy in the long run. We also have Raina James. As I mentioned, she's been in the business for 20 years. She's trying to figure out what her next step is. The big issue at this point in time is that her tour is not selling out, and so she needs to spice up her tour somehow. She either needs to bring somebody else in to tour with her, or she needs to change her tour so that they're playing at smaller locations so that they can say that they sold out. And this is not something that she wants to do because, again, she's a legend. She should be able to sell out these tours and stuff like that. And so they have her tour with Juliet Barnes. And obviously, as I mentioned, they're butting heads, so their music styles are very different. And because Julia is young, she's a poppy artist who's more geared towards teenagers. She doesn't really get the respect from the adult country stars, and so this is something that is a constant source of friction for them throughout the season. We also know that Raina James has a complicated history with one of her band members. The lead guitarist is Deacon Claiborne, someone that she dated before she married Teddy, and we see that this relationship is still a issue for Teddy because Teddy just doesn't like how Deacon is constantly around, and obviously later on in the season we'll find out what exactly the source of this conflict is. And then the last thing I want to mention about Raina is that in her wanting to kind of like transition into the next phase of her career, she's wanting to put out another album, but she wants to kind of change her sound, and her label Edge Hill is not really on board with this because they want her to produce a greatest hits album, and she's not a fan of this because she feels like this is something that older people do, kind of like when they're not necessarily at the end of their career, but she just doesn't want to rely on her old hits. She wants to continue making new and fresh music. So I'm going to transition into my next point. We have Juliet and Deacon. So Juliet really wants Deacon to be part of her tour. He is an amazing guitarist. He's obviously been by Raina's side for her whole 20-year plus career. And Juliet really wants him as part of her tour. It's also kind of like a blow to Raina if she can steal Deacon from her. And so she's really trying hard to get Deacon to her side. She's throwing good offers at him. She wants to write a song with him. She's trying to seduce him, and she's doing everything she can to get him to join her on the tour, and they're even sleeping together. And so she's just really frustrated that she can't really quite get Deacon to her side, and he does ultimately end up rejecting her offer because he wants to stay by Raina's side. And then we do see this interesting moment in the show where we see Juliet stealing nail polish from a store, and she's caught by fans doing this. And so this becomes one of her many scandals throughout season one, and this causes her to lose her tour. So she is having her own individual tour, and Raina is having her own tour as well. But Juliet's image suffers because of this, and so that's when they end up joining tours to kind of like help each other, like you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours type of thing. And then we also learn more about Juliet's mom. Her mom, Jolene, is addicted to drugs and she's not doing well. And so she's just showing up at different places that Juliet is associated with. And she's trying to get in touch with her daughter. She's trying to get money from her daughter to support her habit. And so we have Deacon really kind of getting into like his addiction, his past addiction issues. He's been sober for 13 years. And so he really is able to come into the picture and help Juliet's mom because this is something that he knows a lot about. And so he's the one who's able to get her to go to rehab again. And so we have this scene where Juliet, Deacon, Bo, and her mom Jolene are going to the rehab, and we see Jolene getting out of the car, and she ends up dropping pills that she was trying to take in the car with her. And Deacon picks them up and says, "Hey, you can't take this with you." And then they start to go into the building, and then Jolene starts to put up a fuss about going to rehab, and then she comes back and she basically assaults Juliet to kind of like make her feel bad for forcing her to go to rehab. And then, we kind of see her feel guilty about this. She doesn't really apologize to Juliet or anything, but she does eventually go inside the rehab. And so we see this moment kind of have negative implications for Deacon because one, he is an addict, a former addict, and so he now has this pill bottle of really strong prescription meds, whatever. And so he does have a sober coach. I can't think of the word, but he has somebody that he has as a mentor to help him when he's struggling with his addiction or whatever. And so this person is Coleman, who is also a political figure in Nashville. And so he's meeting with him, and he tells Coleman, "Hey, Jolene, she dropped these pills. I have them. I've been counting them. I want to take them," and so on. And so he ends up giving the pill bottle to Coleman, and we see that this backfires on Coleman later on, which we will get to. So I want to go ahead and transition to my next point. So we have another character in play. Her name is Scarlett. She is Scarlett O'Connor. She is Deacon's niece, and I'm assuming her mother is Deacon's sister. I'm not quite sure. But she has relocated to Nashville to be with her boyfriend Avery, who is I don't know if he's a songwriter, but I think he is a songwriter. I think he is a songwriter, but he's also a performer. So he will sing in front of crowds. This is what he wants to do. And so Scarlett, she is kind of just really doing whatever she can to support Avery. She has put herself in the back seat. She doesn't allow herself to shine, and she's really just tiptoeing around Avery's feelings and just making sure that he feels like he's the man. And so we see in season one, she has this moment where she's kind of like breaking out of her shell and breaking out of her supporting role and kind of becoming the main character. And so we find out that she writes poems, and there's this guy who likes her, Gunner, and he's kind of like working with her to turn her poems into music. And Avery is very threatened by this because he just doesn't like the idea of Scarlett not needing him, of not being the star of the two in the relationship, and he's just really not happy for Scarlett and all of her musical success that she's having. And so what we have happening is that we have Scarlett and Gunnar writing a really good song. They have someone named Waddy who comes around, he hears them performing, singing their duet, and he offers to record a demo of them singing, presumably so that somebody else can sing the song, learn the song, or whatever. And Scarlett shows up to the recording session. She doesn't do well because she's not used to being in this type of environment, and she's also really struggling to kind of like step out of that supporting character role and becoming the main character because she doesn't want this to negatively impact her relationship with Avery, so she definitely makes herself smaller for him. We also see that she really needs Avery to kind of like step up and kind of like encourage her to pursue this, or at least encourage her to give all of her effort to it, to do well, because without Avery's approval, this is not something that she's wanting to pursue seriously because she doesn't know how it's going to affect her relationship. And we also see Avery kind of like using this as an opportunity to get himself more exposure. We do see that at some point, Scarlett and Gunnar, they get a writing deal and they are singing in front of like a group of people who want to hear the song. I can't remember what the context was, but Avery volunteers himself to be a guitar player for them. So I think Gunnar's playing guitar and it's Avery. And Avery, he's basically showing up Gunner at times when he's playing. So there's one time where I think maybe I don't think he plays the wrong keys, but you can tell that he's not playing necessarily what Gunner's playing, and then he goes off on this solo, and so they're really pissed off at him because he's like really taking over their opportunity, and as a result, they do not get their song sold or whatever to that person who was there to see them perform. That person just remembered the guitarist taking over their performance, and so that was not a really good experience for them. Moving on from this, we have Avery, who's part of a band, and Scarlett knows all of their songs. She's always supporting him, and so he is the lead singer, and he eventually gets his own opportunity to kind of like sign a deal, and he ends up hooking up with this producer from Atlanta, and the producer is actually only interested in him, and so he has to leave his bandmates behind, and he agrees to do this because he wants to make it, and so his bandmates are really unhappy with him, and they're also looking for a manager at this point just before they meet the producer from Atlanta, and they hook up with this manager named Marilyn, and basically Deacon warns Avery off of. I don't know if he warns. I think he does warn Avery, but Avery doesn't get it, and so he goes directly to Marilyn, and he says, leave him alone, don't interact with him, because he knows what Marilyn is about, and it turns out that she sleeps with a younger male artist. She basically offers to get them exposure, get them contact, and things like that in exchange for a romantic relationship. And so Avery at first goes over to her house, and he realizes, hey, I can't do this, and he backs out. And then him and Scarlett end up getting into a fight because Scarlett finds out what this Marilyn person is about, and the fact that Avery even took a meeting with her means that he knows what was expected of him, and so obviously Scarlett isn't very happy with this. They break up, and then Avery goes back to Marilyn and sleeps with her, and then they kind of get into the whole dynamic with the producer from Atlanta, which ends up not being a very good experience for Avery. He doesn't really have control over the way his music sounds. They're changing a lot of things that he's not happy about. So he ends up burning his masters as a way to kind of like take his power back. He gives them an advance on a publishing deal that he had to kind of pay back that producer for all of the money that he spent on recording those songs and stuff like that. And so as a result, he gets kind of blackballed in Nashville, and he kind of really has to start over from scratch. And this is a really humbling moment for Avery because he screwed over his bandmate, he screwed over Scarlett, and so he's coming back home to Nashville with his tail between his legs because he realizes that he made a lot of horrible decisions and he didn't get what he wanted in the end. The next thing I'm going to go to is Teddy, and so we talked about Teddy earlier and how he was in financial difficulties just because of bad deals that he made, and so he ends up getting backed by Lamar to become the mayor, and he is really making Raina feel guilty about not supporting him because he's obviously been very supportive of her music career while she's been touring. He's been home with the girls and stuff like that, and so he really feels like this is his moment to shine. This is his moment to be seen as somebody by Nashville society. I do believe that he comes from a line of politicians in his family. His dad had something that was controversial, and then obviously Teddy inherited money from the family success, and then he lost money, and so he doesn't have a very good reputation at this point, and so he really wants to do what he can to restore that, and so he is getting into politics. If you recall me mentioning earlier, they're having financial difficulties, and so Raina's having to do more to kind of make sure that they can pay their bills. I'm not sure how much money they have left, but they do have enough to be okay for a while, but eventually they're going to need more money. And so Lamar finds out about this, and he gives them a $500K loan, but it comes with stipulations that Raina basically needs to cut back drastically on her career in order for them to be able to take that money. And this is not something that she wants to do because she's very proud of her career. This is the only thing that she feels that she has been able to do all on her own without her family's connection. But we do find out that Lamar actually paid for her first album, and so a lot of her success she does owe to her father for the fact that her first album did really well, and then obviously propelled her career forward from that point on. One other thing I do want to mention is that with Teddy running for mayor, we do have him coming up against Coleman, who is, I think, the current mayor, and they're obviously having an election, and so they're not really playing by the book. They're getting low and dirty to do everything they can to help Teddy win. And so they have this moment where they're supposed to sign some pledge that they will basically be honorable or whatever throughout the course of like the election or whatever. And so them signing this pledge is super important. They're supposed to be there at a certain time. It's televised, whatever. And so they have Coleman pulled over by the cops while he is on his way to be at this event. And obviously, the point of doing this is so that they are delaying him to make it seem like this event wasn't as important to him. And then, obviously, the few minutes that he's late gives Teddy a moment to address the crowd and kind of play on the fact that Coleman is late and not taking the event seriously. And so, with Coleman getting pulled over, the cops are in on this. They pulling him over for a very specific reason. They're not going to listen to any reasoning that he is giving them, and they're also not going to do things by the book in terms of how they would normally handle this type of interaction with the current mayor, if that makes sense. So he is obviously trying to get out of like whatever they have pulled him over for, and then they're being very combative with him. They tell him to get out of the car, and then they search his car and they find the pill bottle that Deacon had given him, and so now he is facing, I think, felony charges just because of whatever those pills were that he had. And so this is something that has backfired on him because Coleman himself, I think, has been sober for a while as well, or he just doesn't use drugs at all. I'm not sure which one it is, but people don't believe that he is using drugs just because of whatever reputation he has. And so he has to have a press conference and explain, hey, these were not mine. My blood was clean. I was drug tested, whatever. And then he also had the reputation of being like the sober mentor or whatever. And so people know that these charges are kind of bogus because he doesn't have that reputation. And so we just see how everything is playing out in terms of what the Wyatt family is willing to do in order to make Teddy the mayor. Next, we have Deacon. He has split with Raina at this point. They had a falling out because Raina asked him to play at some event for Teddy, and him and Deacon just got into a pissing match and a pissing contest, and basically they broke up at that point because the fight between Deacon and Teddy was really bad, and so Raina felt like she couldn't work with him anymore. And so we have Deacon kind of finding his next gig. He turned down Juliet, but then he also has this offer to go tour with this other group that he knows, and he's really struggling to find his footing there because it seems like basically every show afterwards they're giving him feedback on what he needs to do differently, and it's a lot of like annoying feedback, I would say. And so he's really having to find that happy medium between doing what he wants to do or doing what he knows how to do, but then also pleasing these new artists that he's working with. And then he ends up finding out about Julia and Raina actually going on tour together, because before it was two separate tours and now they've joined, and so he kind of feels like he missed a great opportunity because obviously he would rather be with Juliet and Raina than with these guys because their dynamic is completely different than what he is used to. Not that he can't fit in with them, it's just a completely different scene. The next thing I want to move into is Raina and Juliet. So now we have them officially on tour together. They performed together at an anniversary party. I think the song is called Wrong Song. It does really well. And we have Raina trying to use this as leverage to get her, not her boss, but at Edge Hill, the guy in charge is Marshall, and he's the one who's pushing for that greatest hits album that we mentioned earlier. And she is wanting to use the buzz from the Wrong Song as a way to kind of like appease Marshall, but also get him to back off of wanting to do a greatest hits album instead of letting her do a new album full of fresh and new material. Next, I want to talk about Raina finding out the truth about Teddy. So she finds out Teddy had a shady business deal where he stole money. He was working with Peggy to make that happen, and so she's really unhappy. She wants to go on tour and take the girls with her. Teddy is not on board with this. He feels like it's not fair for her to take the kids away, and then obviously she'd be taking the kids out of school. And so the Mara finds out about this, and then him and Tandy, who is Raina's sister, they come over to her house, and they're kind of like trying to make her feel bad about wanting to take the girls with her, and they keep threatening threatening. Lamar keeps threatening people finding out the truth about Maddie, which is that Maddie is actually Deacon's child. And so we really see that this is used against Raina a lot, that if she doesn't comply, they're going to somehow, her actions are going to somehow be responsible for people finding out the truth about Maddie. And then we do see this moment where Lamar makes this threat, and then we have this moment where Raina goes to Teddy's office and she's talking to Lamar. He's talking to Lamar, and she comes in and tells Teddy what happened. And then we kind of see Teddy going off on Lamar and actually revealing that he knows that Maddie is not his biological daughter, that she's Deacon. And so we kind of see that leverage that Lamar is holding over Raina's head. We see that kind of like disappear, because now that it's kind of like out there in terms of Teddy, he can't hold that over Raina's head anymore. The next thing I want to get into is Juliet and Sean. So we have Juliet needing to restore her image, and so she is hooked up with a football player, and they end up doing a lot of like PR kind of like outings or whatever, but they end up actually kind of like dating, and we find out that he is not wanting to be intimate just yet. He wants to wait for marriage, and she's kind of turned off by this. She accuses him of being gay, which is kind of ridiculous. Him not wanting to be intimate with her does not mean that he's gay. But anyway, so we see her kind of like really learning how to deal with this. And then we also hear a lot about Sean's family. And so she ends up going to church with them, and then she ends up singing at that church, and then they have dinner later together, kind of like as a family. And she's talking to his mother, and his mother basically said, you know, we just went along with this because of basically all of the press with you and our son, and you're basically never going to fit into this family, and we really don't like you. We're just tolerating you. And so Juliet takes this as a challenge. She proposes to Sean. They sleep together, and then she is kind of like using this um idea of being married and having a wedding and stuff like that to kind of like force his family, his mom in particular, to accept him. And so his parents find out obviously that they eloped, and they want to have a proper wedding, and it needs to be within a certain time frame. And so you see them having different like meetings to plan and prepare for this upcoming wedding. And then we have the wedding actually happening, and Juliet doesn't show up. She's basically a runaway bride. And then we later have Sean wanting to file for divorce, but then he upgrades it to basically an annulment, because he feels like Juliet, and she did do this, he feels like she basically used a marriage and a wedding and stuff like that as a way to kind of like compromise his integrity, as far as what he was saying about how he wants to be married forever to one person, how he wants to wait for marriage for intimate relations, and she's kind of manipulated him into giving those things up when she had no intentions of actually being married to him long term. She was just trying to get back at his mom. And so we see all of this playing out, and then we also see a little bit of Juliet's mom here, where Juliet's mom is in rehab. She's not really interacting with her mom, but Juliet and Sean's mother are playing games, and Sean ends up contacting her mom to kind of like, because he wants to meet her, but Juliet pushes this off. She goes to see her mom anyway, and the conversation doesn't go well, because her mom basically tells her, you know, being married is not going to make you happier. You have a boy, you have the same boy that I have, and this is not the right thing that you need to do. And so Juliet gets really upset about that. Next, we have Gunnar. Again, I mentioned him and Scarlett working together. We find out that Gunnar has a brother who's in jail for armed robbery, and so they end up going to Texas for some tour thing or whatever. And he goes to pick up his brother. His brother is obviously scared for his life, and so he had a gun on him. Within hours of getting out, he has a gun on him, and he has sold Gunnar's guitar. And so Gunnar is forced to kind of deal with all of the stuff that his brother is doing, as far as putting himself in a position to end up right back in jail. And so he supposedly dropped his brother off at the halfway house. His brother didn't show up, and so he's just dealing with the fallout of his brother's actions, because he does reveal that he was with his brother at the time that they were robbing somebody. and he was the getaway driver, but he's got scared and left his brother, and so he feels like it's his fault that his brother is in jail. And so we do see them later on in the season kind of reuniting. Jason comes to Nashville. He stays in Gunner and Scarlett's home, and he still has the gun on him, and so Gunner confronts him and says, hey, I thought you got rid of this, and he throws the gun in the river. And so this is very bad for Jason because he knows that people are after him. He has no protection, and then I think within like a few days, Jason ends up dead, and he was beaten to death, and so Gunner feels really bad about this, and it causes him to really become depressed, really upset. He can't write and stuff like that, and he ends up ruining his relationship with Scarlett just because he ends up having to bail him out of jail, and she's just really seeing the bad path that he's going on as a result of everything with his brother. The next thing that we have happening, which is kind of a huge moment, involving Scarlett, and so we have Deacon on tour with the Rebel King, and we have this one guy, Sai, who's kind of jealous of all of the attention that Deacon is getting from this one reporter, and so he's really competing with him. We also find out that Sai is a slime bag, and so we see him being introduced to Scarlett, and he's a little handy, he's a little weird. Deacon picks up on them, and he tries to get Scarlett away from him, kind of like in a friendly way. Like he doesn't realize that Sai has bad intentions for Scarlett, and so we see this moment where Sky kind of pulls Scarlett away from Deacon. He gets her into this room. There's other people in the room, but then he gets security to get everyone out of the room, and then it's just him and Scarlett, and he tries to assault her. And the only reason that Deacon knows that something is wrong is because he's interacting with fans, and then he goes to look for Scarlett, and then he's like, wait, where's Scarlett? And then one of the Rebel King band members, they actually nod to Deacon like, hey, something's going on in the room, you need to go in there. And so he has to fight with the security guard to get into the room, and then he ends up assaulting Sai or punching him, and Scarlett is able to fend him off, and then Deacon comes in and hits him some more and all of that, and then he quits the band. And so obviously this is a scary moment for Scarlett because she's not naive, but she has an innocent personality and demeanor, and so obviously it was easy to see how she was taken advantage of because this is not something that she was used to. Even though her uncle is super successful, she isn't used to being around men like that. And so obviously I'm really glad that nothing bad happened to her from that, and that she was able to defend herself, and then she had Deacon coming to her rescue. So the next thing I want to talk about is we officially have Teddy becoming the mayor, and so what happens is Teddy, he instantly goes against everything that Lamar wants to do. There is a issue with where a baseball stadium will be built. Lamar basically wants it built on land that he owns so that he benefits from it. Teddy immediately does not go along with this. He is basically approving for the baseball stadium to be built elsewhere, and that location will actually be beneficial for the city instead of lining Lamar's pocket. He also appoints somebody else as a deputy mayor. He appoints Coleman, and so he's really just going against everything that Lamar wants him to do. He starts sleeping with Peggy because at this point, him and Raina are kind of distant. They're not around each other. That they are not necessarily giving up on their marriage, but they really need space. And so he basically allows Peggy into the picture. They were already interacting just because of everything with that embezzlement thing that they had going on. There was nothing between them at that point. They did used to date, but they weren't actually having an affair. And so once him and Raina are strained, then he starts like entertaining Peggy a little bit more, and he starts sleeping with her, and then he eventually shows up to Raina's hotel room while they were on tour, and he asked her for a divorce. And this was at a moment where Deacon ended up kissing her in the elevator, and so she later on ended up texting him saying, hey, come up to my room, let's talk. And then when she opens the door, we see it's actually Teddy, and then that's when he drops the news of wanting a divorce. And I want to talk a little bit more about Deacon joining the tour. So he, at this point, is on the tour, but he's part of Juliet's crew, not Raina's. And so they shouldn't have much interaction, but Teddy is still threatened by this. And then we also have Juliet wanted to make all of these changes because she wants to have a more grown-up sound. She doesn't want to do the kind of like the kiddie music to her teen fan base. And so she does have this moment where she's making all of these changes, and her manager Glenn says, "Hey, you know what? Whatever she tells you to do, come to me first, and I'll give you approval." And so Juliet is talking to Deacon about this, and he tells her what's going on behind her back, and she ends up calling everybody out of their room like at a super late time, just banging on the door saying, "Get out here right now!" And then basically she's yelling at everybody and telling them, "Hey, you know, I'm your boss, not Glenn. Listen to me. He's not your boss, blah, blah, blah." And so Glenn ends up quitting. The other thing I want to talk about this is that I gave you the backstory of like what was happening while Deacon was on tour. So then we have him and Raina kissing, and then we have Teddy coming to Raina and saying, "Hey, you know, I want a divorce." Maddie was to go at this point of the season because we have Maddie overhearing a conversation between Teddy and Peggy, and basically he's saying stuff about being so happy about being with her. And so obviously Maddie knows that something is off because he's married to her mom. He is obviously talking to someone else. And so I was really glad that one, Maddie overheard that, and two, she ended up telling her mother after they had the divorce conversation with the kids. Raina came home so they could have that conversation. Maddie comes to her separately and says, "Hey mom, he's still seeing that woman. He said this and blah blah blah." So I was really glad that Maddie went straight to her mom and told her what she heard instead of like keeping it to herself or even going to her father and kind of getting silenced into not sharing that information. And so this allows Raina to confront Teddy about this and basically let him know that he's been caught. He's basically traumatized his daughter with all of this and that he's not going to get away with it. The next thing that we have happening is that we have Scarlett getting a solo deal with Raina's new label, Highway 65. So initially, Gunnar and Scarlett were supposed to have this opportunity to play for Raina because she is looking for new artists for her label, and Gunnar, he's dealing with everything with his brother, so he doesn't show up. Scarlett showed up and obviously performed, and she gets a solo deal. The next thing that we have happening is that we have Juliet and Jolene kind of like figuring out their relationship after Jolene gets out of rehab. They have a family counselor, like a sponsor, whatever, helping Jolene. It's a man named Dante helping Jolene kind of like navigate her recovery journey. And we have this counselor, Dante, really kind of like pushing Juliet to kind of be a better support system for her mother, and he's really kind of like digging into her side of things and what's going on and how that impacts her relationship with her mother. And so that there's this one moment where Jolene is talking about coming to one of Juliet's concerts and how she tried to hug Juliet or something like that, and Juliet just ignored her. And we see that Juliet denies that this happened. She tells her mother that she made it up. And so Dante kind of jumps in and says, "Hey, you know, if you don't remember it, that's fine, but don't discredit her memories. Just say that you don't remember it. Don't say that it didn't happen." And so he is initially helping them to better their relationship and getting Juliet to communicate better with her mother, but we do see that he eventually starts to cross some lines. And then as a result of everything that's happening with Juliet, she's really fighting with her label. She's navigating a lot of PR nightmares, and this next thing that she has going on is that she is having a party to kind of like announce her new album or something like that, a song, and it's only supposed to be for 50 people, but she ends up tweeting about it so that more people show up. And one of those people who comes is Maddie. And so obviously there's only supposed to be 50 people in this small space. It's overcrowded. It's way past capacity. And then you have people kind of like just pushing and knocking things over, and people get hurt. And so Maddie is one of those people who gets hurt, and Raina calls Juliet later on to kind of like flush her out because she caused this to happen because she was being immature and she wasn't really thinking things through and trying to make herself more relevant. Because there's a lot of things that I haven't talked about so far or mentioned that have already happened at this point in the season that she has done to try to get herself more respect and more publicity and more attention, and it's just kind of backfired plan after plan. So the next thing I want to go into is Juliet and Dante. So he crosses the line because they start getting really close. He starts weighing in kind of like on her business and different things that she should be doing as far as getting taken more seriously and stuff like that. And so he's helping her prepare for meetings. He's telling her what kind of like decisions to make. And so we see them start to sleep together and kind of like really developing their relationship. And obviously we have people really kind of like confused about why he's weighing in. And so Deacon is one of the first people to kind of like step in and say, hey, you know, what is he doing? Why is he making these decisions? He's not anybody in the music world to have such a say in what's going on here. And what leads to Deacon basically saying that is we have this moment where Avery is supposed to be looking for something. He goes to Juliet's tour bus and he finds them hooking up in the back of the tour bus. I don't think Juliet saw him, but Dante definitely did. And so he ends up pulling Avery aside and firing him. And so um, Deacon finds out about this and then he goes and confronts Dante and all of this stuff. And so we see Juliet kind of really falling into this kind of like web that Dante has spun for her as far as getting her completely like reliant on his opinion and his approval of different things. And so what happens is that we have Deacon going to her and he's like, you know, you've made all of these changes, we need to rehearse, you need to be part of it, and she's kind of just blowing him off and stuff like that. And Deacon is telling her that he's not going to listen to Dante and that she needs to be more involved, and so basically he threatens to quit after this leg of the tour, and then she's like, oh well, you're not that important, I can just find another person. And so she's really damaging their relationship because she is continuing to fall for everything that Dante is spinning. So what we have happening next is that Jolene doesn't like this separation between her and Dante. He's supposed to be there for her. She is starting to have feelings for him as well, but she's also noticing that Juliet has taken him away from her, and so at this point, she does find out that they're sleeping together, and she is like forced to kind of like keep away from them. But she ends up coming to Juliet to tell her that she saw Dante kissing another woman. And at this point, Juliet and Dante are looking at houses together. And so Dante has initiated plans for finding houses that they can look at and buy together. And so Jolene says, hey, you know, I saw him kissing this woman. And it turns out that the woman that he was kissing was the realtor that he was using to get Juliet to buy a house. And we see Juliet give this woman passes to her concert. He tries to question her to find out the nature of her relationship with Dante, but she is really fooled by this nerdy persona that this woman is giving off, and she mistakenly assumes that Dante wouldn't be interested in this woman, and then she doesn't realize that this woman is just playing an act, basically. And so Dante ends up flaming Jolene to make it look like she's still taking drugs, but then we have Juliet looking more closely at the pills and she realizes that it's something that her mother was allergic to and thus she wouldn't be taking it. And so she tries to get a hold of Dante and then she finds out that Dante had disappeared a little while ago. He was supposed to pay people with whatever money he had, and then they later find out that he stole like $400,000 from them. And so Juliet is realizing that he is a con artist. The other stuff that ends up happening is that she doesn't want anyone to find out what Dante has done to her, so she's not trying to get her money back. She's just trying to figure out how to like move on from everything that's happened. And then we have Dante getting in touch with her mom or with Julia, I'm not sure, and he reveals that he made it a sex tape and he is going to release this sex tape if they don't pay him money. And initially he wants 2 million, but then when he sees how easy it is to get 2 million, he asks for 10 million. And so what this leads to is Jolene realizing how bad the situation is for her daughter, so she ends up contacting Dante and she kind of plays him and pretends like she is screwing over her daughter basically. And so she gets him to her apartment. They're both drugged up. And so they're not thinking correctly or whatever. But Jolene has a clear plan. She's going to get the tape from Dante, and then she also has a gun, so she's going to kill him. And she ends up shooting him, and then she commits murder suicide. She doesn't shoot herself. I think she overdoses on drugs, basically. And the one thing that was really confusing about this is that obviously we know that Jolene did all of that intentionally, like she was trying to protect her daughter. I was really confused that Juliet didn't understand that her mother was doing that. Like she just assumed that her mother fell back into drugs and was like, I guess, backstabbing her with Dante or whatever. And so she didn't realize that her mother was kind of she didn't put together that her mother was only meeting with Dante because of everything that was happening as far as the money that he stole from her and then the sex tape that he was trying to blackmail her with. And so after her mother's body is found, Deacon comes to try and support her, and she just goes off on Deacon and kind of blames him for getting in their business and trying to help and not actually helping. And so I thought that she was trying to make him feel bad because she wasn't trying to tell the full story of why her mother was with Dante, which is that she was trying to get the sex tape back. And then you do have Juliet finding a letter or receiving a letter that her mother wrote and realizing that her mother did all of that for her. And so I thought that that should have been a little bit more obvious to Juliet, and so I didn't really like how that storyline played out as far as Juliet thinking badly of her mother and then having to be told basically what was happening and then realizing that she mistreated her mother basically. So the next thing that we have happening is that Deacon and Raina, they start dating again. This is after everything is happening with Teddy announcing the divorce. We do have Deacon dating a woman named Stacy during this time, but he's obviously still attracted to Raina. He still wants her, and at this point in time, Raina is dating a producer named Liam, and so he is happy with Stacy, but he also just doesn't like seeing Raina with somebody else, and so um, Deacon and Raina, they end up kind of like sleeping together and really wanting to grow their relationship, but the thing that's holding them back is the truth about Maddie. And so obviously she is forced by Teddy to keep this from Deacon because this is just a way of Teddy kind of really trying to control the relationship and kind of keep Deacon out of their lives as much as he can. And so this causes Raina to pull apart from Deacon, and Deacon knows her inside and out, so he knows that she's hiding something from her, and they get in a fight about this, but he ends up coming to her and saying, hey, this doesn't matter, I'm still here. The next thing that we have happening is that Lamar has a heart attack, and so he's in the middle of talking to one of his people, and he has a heart attack. And what happens is Lamar ends up going to the hospital, and then we have Tandy kind of taking over for Lamar while he's out, and she discovers that Lamar was in touch with Peggy, and so she wants to know what the nature of that relationship was. And she ends up going to Teddy and telling Teddy that Peggy was the one who leaked the news of the divorce to the tabloids so that it could be in the papers. And so this was a huge thing because when Teddy and Raina told the girls that they were getting a divorce, nobody knew about it. And then like the next day, they went to the grocery store and there was magazines all over. And so they weren't sure how this news got out, but it painted Raina in a bad light and kind of made her seem like she was cheating when she actually wasn't. Well, I mean, I guess they both were kind of like hooking up with other people, but I think Teddy crossed the line more because he slept with Peggy and he was using that to kind of betray his family. Then we kind of see Tandy as a result of her kind of wanting to get back at Teddy. She goes to Coleman and she tells him to look into Teddy's past, look into his Cumberland deal and kind of find out what was going on with that. And so Coleman, he's been a family friend. He grew up kind of with Raina and Tandy, and he also knows Teddy from him being married to Raina, and he's not really wanting to be used as a pawn in this kind of like infighting that's going on between the Wyatts and Teddy, because he obviously knows that they were backing Teddy. Something happened, and now they're trying to use Coleman to kind of out Teddy, and so he's not wanting to be part of this, and he resigns. And then we have Tandy trying to replace Lamar at Wyatt Industries, and this backfires because she goes to the board, I guess, and they're like, hey, we understand what you're trying to do, but we're gonna do this the right way. But nobody feels like this is like a hostile takeover or whatever. And so we have Tandy sitting in his chair, and we have like all of these board members around, and Lamar comes in, and he basically tells her to get out of her seat, and so we know that this is the end of Tandy's crew. The next thing that we have happening goes back to Gunner and Scarlett, and so we have Gunner really struggling with everything after his brother's death. He is struggling to write. He comes across a notebook of his brother's where his brother has written songs. His brother was also an artist, and he was the reason why Gunner became so into music or whatever. And so there's this one duck song that he starts to perform, and he is also becoming closer with this guy who's a neighbor of him and Scarlett's named Will. He is really into music, country music, and wants to break out. And he on stage has this really strong persona where basically all attention is on him. And so he gives Gunner this advice of how he could have more of the stage presence. And so we see kind of like a huge change in Gunner as far as how he's performing and what he is singing about. And so he ends up getting kind of like an a offer to record a demo, and he really has to buy into this outlaw lifestyle mentality or image. And this is something that he tries to maintain. He just keeps going deeper and deeper down the hole into trying to portray this outlaw image, and then he's also having to use songs that aren't his because this person who wants to record the demo, they're only interested in the stuff that his brother has written. They're not interested in the stuff that Gunnar is actually passionate about. And this is what leads to him and Scarlett breaking up because Will and Gunnar end up getting in a fight somewhere. I can't recall where. I think it was after some performance, and so Scarlett has to come and bail him out, and she's like, hey, this isn't working for me, we're done. Prior to that, though, we do have Gunnar and Will getting closer together, and we do have Will making a move and trying to kiss Gunnar, and this kind of strains their relationship because we wouldn't have really expected that to happen, and so that does become a huge storyline in season 2 with Will kind of dealing with like his sexuality. The other thing I want to talk about is that Will, because Gunnar is so invested in this outlaw image, we have Will kind of not necessarily sliding in, but he's given opportunities alongside Scarlett and taking and creating opportunities for himself, so he's able to move up the ranks faster and kind of get himself a solo recording deal. The next thing that happened in this same kind of time frame is that we do have Scarlett getting opportunities to perform as a result of the solo recording deal that she signed with Raina, and so she performed at the Opry, and this is the performance that Gunnar missed because he was in jail, and that leads to them breaking up. The next thing that happens is that we have Raina and Juliet nominated for Female Vocalist of the Year. We have Juliet winning that award, and this is in the midst of everything with her mother, and so she's just really struggling during this time. We then also have Teddy. He's understanding that Raina and Deacon are dating. He doesn't want Deacon around, and so he files a restraining order to keep Deacon away from the girls. And Raina is able to go to Lamar, and she's able to get him to get them into court faster, basically, so that they can have the restraining order dismissed. Then we have Maddie kind of really understanding that something is off here, and she ends up going through her mother's stuff, and she finds paperwork, and she finds a paternity test that says that Teddy is not her father. And so because she knows that Deacon and her mom have history, she ends up going to Deacon's house and saying, hey, I think you're my father. And so this is another epic moment for Maddie where she finds out something and she goes to the right person that she needs to in order to get answers. So the first time she went to her mother, told her mother what was going on with her dad and Peggy. Here she's finding out that Teddy is not her father, and she's going straight to Deacon and telling Deacon what he needs to know. Basically not beating around the bush, and she's just really eliminating a lot of like miscommunication between people, and she's just being very direct and saying to people what they need to hear. And I really appreciate this from her because I really did not know how Raina was going to tell Deacon, if she was at any point, about Maddie, just because of how Teddy was reacting. And so I was really glad that Maddie found out and she really took control of that situation and kind of just blew it up in the best way. And so obviously we have Deacon, who is really upset about all of this. He realizes that he's been lied to for 13 years. He's been around Raina for 20 plus years, and he is feeling lied to because this was his daughter. He was around them periodically, and he had no idea that this was his child. He's also realizing that she was pregnant around the time that she left him, married Teddy, and he's just really struggling with all of this new information. And he actually ends up taking a drink, taking pills, and in his sobriety, and he just really is spiraling in this moment. He tears up his house. Coleman is coming over, trying to talk to him. He doesn't want to hear from Coleman because he thinks Coleman knew. And then he is really scaring Scarlett, who's trying to make sure that he's okay, and she doesn't really know what's going on. And so we have this event happening at the Bluebird. I can't recall who it was for. I think it was Juliet's event for her mother. She always wanted her mother to hear her sing at the Bluebird Cafe, or I think her mother wanted her to sing at the Bluebird Cafe, whatever. Raina and Deacon are both invited to this event. Deacon sees Raina. He heads out. Raina follows him. Obviously, Raina realizes that he's drunk and she won't let him drive. And so they're driving. She's reaching for things and trying to grab things from Deacon. And they end up basically missing a car, flipping several times. And then the season ends with the car accident, and we have no idea what has happened. Whew. Okay, so to go ahead and wrap things up, a lot has happened in season one. This was a really, really crazy season. I'm actually really glad that I started watching. I'm definitely going to try and finish the other 5 seasons. I'm already maybe halfway through season 2 right now, but I've enjoyed everything so far in season 1. And I really hope that if you guys have already watched the show, if you haven't watched it, that you enjoyed this recap. And I hope you guys are really as excited about Nashville as I am. This has been a great show so far, and I'm actually sad that there's only 6 seasons. I wish that there was a lot more seasons, but there's nothing we can do about that. And so yeah, I will be back with another episode on season 2, and thank you guys for listening to this episode.